Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, welcome back. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Dorset police have named the 17-year-old boy who died after getting into difficulty in the water off Bournemouth Beach on Wednesday. Joe Abus from Southampton died after being pulled from the sea. In a statement, his family said they were heartbroken and devastated, describing him as a fabulous young man. A 12-year-old girl named in reports as Suna Khan from High Wycombe in Buckinghamshire also died in the incident, which involved 10 swimmers. A sightseeing boat named the Dorset Belle has been impounded by police. A man has been charged after allegedly wearing a shirt to the FA Cup final yesterday, which appeared to have an offensive reference to the Hillsborough disaster. 33-year-old James White from Warwickshire has been charged with displaying threatening or abusive writing. He's expected to appear at Willesden Magistrates Court next week. 97 Liverpool fans died in 1989 at Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield. Indian authorities say a signal problem was likely responsible for the country's worst train crash in decades. 275 people were killed in the accident. Another 1,200 were injured when a passenger train hit a stationary freight train before derailing and striking a second passenger train. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has vowed to punish anyone found responsible. The Immigration Minister has told GB News it's wrong for migrants to demand better hotel accommodation while waiting for their asylum claims to be processed. It's after a protest was sparked in London by migrants being asked to sleep 4 to a room. Speaking to Camilla Tominey, Robert Jenrick said the government will never put their interests above the British public. He also said sharing hotel rooms is necessary to get value for taxpayers' money.
Remember, these are migrants who have said they are destitute. They've said that they have absolutely nowhere to stay, no friends, no family, no money, and the taxpayer is stepping up and providing them with good quality accommodation and board and lodgings. And so, I think those migrants are wrong to protest and say that they deserve to have single bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms and so on. And I'm pleased to see that common sense seems to have prevailed in this case.
A Labour MP has told GB News victims are too scared to complain about sexual predators in Parliament. Charlotte Nichols said harassment is baked into every single part of how Westminster operates. She also accused the Labour Party of choosing not to act on concerns raised about a number of colleagues over a very long period. Her comments come after she revealed being handed a list of 30 MPs she should avoid when first becoming an MP. You're up to date on GB News. Now it's time for Free Speech Nation.
A secret government unit colludes with social media to curb criticism of the lockdown. An Oxford college threatens to expel students for misgendering. And Anglo-Saxons are cancelled. This is Free Speech Nation. And welcome to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. This is the show where we take a look at culture, current affairs and politics. And, of course, we'll have the latest from those lovable culture warriors. They've had a busy week trying to sack workers who don't use preferred pronouns and attempted to cancel a book you may have heard of. It's called the Bible. Anyway, we're going to be covering that later on. And also, a former childline counsellor tells us about his concerns that teenagers are being given potentially dangerous advice on the charities forums. Best-selling author Michael Schellenberger will join us to discuss the counter-disinformation team set up by the government to target lockdown critics during the pandemic. And Ella Whelan will be here to talk about the protests which disrupted Kathleen Stock's speech at the Oxford Union this week. And, of course, I've got a fantastic panel who are going to be answering questions from our lovely studio audience. So let me introduce them. My studio guests tonight are Cressida Wetton and Lewis Schaefer. Lewis, it's been a while since you've been on the show, hasn't it?
It has been. I was beginning to feel unloved.
Well, you are unloved,
yeah.
But that's a different question. No, the reason was sometimes you can be quite, I don't know, near the edge. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's your job, is to stop me from being over the edge. The people don't want to see somebody who's far away from the edge.
No, that's true. I do need to rein him in sometimes.
Well, it's a good job you've got training as a teacher.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I'm never going back to that. We've got a lovely studio audience here tonight, so I think it's wise if we get some questions from them. We've got a question first from Jackie. Where is Jackie? Hello, Jackie. How are you?
Hello. Is the new police code of practice a victory for free speech?
Yeah, so this is a big deal. This is Suella Braverman has put out this new policing code of practice. It's been unveiled. It's going to tell officers, finally, that they should not record non-crime hate incidents. Well, actually, they say they can record them only when absolutely necessary. Now, this is an interesting one because we've been going on about this on this show for a long, long time. The police, I think, should not be investigating non-crime. And the problem with these non-crime hate incidents was that, say someone said something to me that I perceived was motivated by prejudice for a protected characteristic. Say I thought, Cressida, you criticising my tie, if I interpreted that that was motivated by homophobia, I could just phone up the police and you would have that recorded on your file without... They wouldn't tell you about it, it would just be there. And then when you applied for a job that requires a DBS check, you wouldn't get called for interview. It's that sinister, right?
Yeah, I believe it is. I've got a couple of friends who've said things at comedy nights that have caused them to go for voluntary conversations with the police afterwards. And
Is
it's
that
not
right?
good. Yeah, I mean, the person is now fine and in the clear, and that's great, but it's extremely stressful.
But a comedy night's going to be full of non-crime hate incidents, right?
Of course, you'd hope so,
hope
wouldn't
so.
you? You would certainly hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, terrible. So this is a step in the right direction, but it's
It
still
is.
got this kind of discretionary element that doesn't make me feel 100%.
No, that's a bit of a worry. But the weird thing about this, Lewis, is that basically the police have been ignoring... I mean, these non-crime hate incidents were put into place by the College of Policing a number of years ago by themselves. They weren't told to do it, they just did it. And the College of Policing, by the way, is the body that trains police officers. And then people realised, actually, this is kind of creepy and Orwellian with the police monitoring your thoughts. And then Fair Cop, a group called Fair Cop, protested. Priti Patel, Home Secretary in 2021, told the police to stop doing it. They ignored her. Then we had this High Court ruling in the Harry Miller case. They ignored that. So are they going to actually do their job this time?
I don't think they are. But whatever their job is, they think this is... I mean, what is policing? It's totally fluid. So obviously they make up their own minds what's capable. The rule books for the policing is like this thick. If they want to bung you up, to use a British phrase. I've never said that before. If they want,
I don't think that is a British phrase, Lewis. I think you've just made it up.
That's not what it means.
It means something different.
Yeah.
Lewis, what you're saying is you're saying the police can get you if they want to get you, but I don't think they do want to. I think they'd rather be solving crime.
No, they wouldn't.
Of course they would, Lewis.
Because that involves work. It's the police. The police are the police. Listen,
this is what I was talking about.
Yeah,
is this kind of attitude that
I
gets you in trouble?
I can talk about the police because basically I'm so far from the police.
Yeah.
I know what they do. I think they're
precedent. I think there is a point to be made here. Is that the police are just to shut Lewis up, to be honest, but the police are continually tweeting out things like, don't tweet anything offensive or we'll come after you.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the vast majority of robberies go uninvestigated, never mind unsolved.
Absolutely, and they're not very popular with the public, are they? So if I were a police person, I think I would welcome a bit more doing stuff to impress people like Lewis, because I think it would just make that. Surely they join. You think they join the force for sinister reasons?
No,
I think they join to.
I think police have their hands are tied by the College of Police.
They joined it for sinister reasons. I think every person, every job has an ethos and a joy from doing it, and being a policeman is you get to tell people what to do. The kind of person who wants to tell people, what to do.
They say that about teachers, Lewis. I used to be a teacher.
Yes, that's also teaching. Teachers want to seem like they're so smart and better than other people. Okay?
And that's why I took the job, right?
Totally true. Yes, exactly.
It was a power trip.
Yes,
why do you think I do this, Lewis?
Yes, it is. It's just sitting there telling people what to do. And it's the same way with the police. The police want to control people because they feel like their lives are out. It's a psychological thing. It's like us being I'm not a comedian, but let's just say
you are a comedian, Lewis.
Whatever. But it's like I want to make people like me, but at the same time show disdain for them.
OK, this has turned into a therapy session for Lewis. And I don't think we need to delve into... Nothing to do with the question, so we're not going to delve into Lewis's psyche there.
Why do you have me on this show?
I don't know why I have you on this show, Lewis. We're going to move on to a question now from Ina. Where is Ina?
I'm here. The question is, should be kicked out of university for misgendering someone?
OK, so this is an interesting one. This is Regent's Park College at the University of Oxford, and they've released this trans inclusion statement. It says students could be expelled for behaviour such as, quote, consistently using incorrect titles, pronouns or names to refer to a trans person. And then over in America this week, coincidentally, we've had the employees of this of the city of Dallas in Texas being told they could be fired if they don't use preferred pronouns. This is obviously a trend, Cressida, that I think is creeping, because it starts with, would you mind using the pronouns that this person would like you to use? And suddenly it becomes, you must use the pronouns this person likes you to use. And irrespective of what you think about that, there's a very good reason why in a free society we don't have what's called compelled speech, right? We don't have that because you're not free. If you have to use words that other people are decreeing, that's not freedom.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm not up for it. I mean, I think it's great that you shouldn't have bullying, and I think if somebody is winding up a trans person, then that's a separate issue, isn't it?
But bullying and harassment will already be against the laws.
Exactly.
At that college in Oxford.
Exactly.
So the idea, but the problem that Oxford University have is that the vast majority of people use pronouns, male and female pronouns, to denote biological sex. They don't do it to denote gender identity because that's a belief that is only shared by 1% maximum of the population. So to say you must use the pronouns of someone else demands is almost like saying you must make this religious declaration that you might not necessarily believe in, which is a problem.
Yeah, it's compelled speech, and I mean, imagine if we had compelled speech on this channel, then you would be
exactly.
There's anti-compelled
we wouldn't get this joy. We wouldn't get
Lewis,
fruitful product that is Lewis.
You must say, like, I mean, in Canada there have been people put in jail for failing to use the language that has been demanded by activists. Is that coming over here, Lewis, do you think?
Well, I think I hate to say it, and I know this is not the answer you want me to say, but I think there should be, if it's about being nice to people, and I think...
Is that what you think?
Yes, I do think it is that way. And, if someone wants to call themselves something and they want you to call them, you should call them that thing. If they want to use words that have a negative... They don't want you to use words that have negative connotations, you should not use them.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. Yeah. And, of course, it is always couched in terms of it's just being polite. But sometimes, actually, it's not. Sometimes it's a way to exert power. So, for instance, we had the case of Adam Graham, who changed it, a double rapist, who changed his name to Isla Bryson, demanded to be called he, she and her.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should be extending courtesy to double rapists.
I think possibly those people should be excluded from this.
Right. Well, there we go.
But it shouldn't. But it should be. We should just assume if somebody wants to be called a she and she is a he, maybe we should just call everybody what the left wants us to call them, which is comrade.
But it's about it being...
Just say that would avoid problems. But I think...
Okay, what about, how far does this go? Does it go to neopronouns such as je and je, cat and cat self for people who identify as cats? Would you use those pronouns for those individuals?
I think you should make your best effort to...
No, you wouldn't, Lewis.
No,
you wouldn't. You're such a contrarian.
No.
You would not meow at someone on demand.
On demand, I might not, but I might. You know what? I've done it for a paid.
Yeah, I know you've done it, but those are for other reasons at the weekend in a club that we won't advertise on this show. Anyway, we're going to move on now to a question from Cecil. Is it Cecil or Cecil? Cecil. Hello, Cecil.
Did the government try to suppress discussion of the lockdown policies?
This is actually quite a shocking revelation. This one came out in the Telegraph this week, and this is a report that claims that a government counter-disinformation unit was actually working with social media companies during the pandemic to actually suppress discussion of lockdown policies. So in these documents, they're saying that critics of the government's approach, be they in the press or whatever, they were being monitored by this unit. And now all of these records have come out. Lewis, this is kind of chilling, isn't it? Because we've had this with the Twitter files in America, where we now know that the FBI and Twitter, there was lots of, certainly lots of discussions, if not collusion, going on there to suppress certain accounts, certain points of view. Surely when it comes to a pandemic where we know nothing about this is a new phenomenon, there should be more discussion about it, not less.
I agree with you, but we live in a police state, and we're controlled. We're controlled. This state is way more police-driven than America is, and America's a totally police. You've
got a real problem with the police, haven't you, Lewis?
I totally do, and I have a problem with authority.
Yes.
I know I look a certain way, but it's like
So you think? I mean, like the problem here is, like, for instance, with Jay Bhattacharya, for instance, one of the doctors who co-signed the Great Barrington Declaration, and his account was flagged and minimised on Twitter at the behest of the US government. Yeah. That's kind of a scary situation when that kind of thing happens. But the
benefit of it is, in the United States of America, is the Americans actually paid private companies to suppress the information. In this country, it's you're basically hit on the head by Ofcom and
yeah, but Ofcom's a different thing, because Ofcom is about broadcasting, and all channels voluntarily sign up to it.
Yeah.
Twitter, social media, Facebook.
They don't voluntarily sign up.
Oh, they do,
because they can't be on the air unless they do that. So
you can be, but you just
Can this be broadcast? No, it cannot be unless it's signed.
But that's because we have signed up to Ofcom.
Yes, yes. You just answered your own question, Andrew.
Cressida, what do you think of this? I mean,
I think
it's a bit dodgy, isn't it? When the government is sort of saying we can't even have discussion. It's bad enough when YouTube is sort of kicking off people from the channel because they raise questions. And you sort of expect it of Silicon Valley, but the government?
I think it's horrific. I mean, as you said, it's the whole point is it's new. We don't know what it is. Let's discuss it. What are the chances that the first few months of decision were right forevermore?
Right, exactly.
I mean, of course we need discussion.
And it's very interesting, isn't it? Because the Twitter files, they were barely covered by UK media and a lot of sort of left-leaning US media. Yeah. It's almost like if you just ignore it, it goes away. Well, later in the show, we've got Michael Schellenberger, who is one of the journalists who was entrusted to leak the Twitter files. And we're going to talk about that, because I think this is a very serious question when it comes to freedom, when it comes to liberty.
But don't present it in the way that Cressida presented it. We don't know what it is, so we should have an open investigation. Everybody knew what it was. I knew what it was on March 20th when I posted my first Facebook thing that said this is a fake pandemic.
Yeah, Lewis, this was your attempt to provoke.
No, it isn't
as usual.
It was a
If it was a fake pandemic, how come I got sick from it 3 times?
We all get sick because the flu happens every year, and people get sick. Well, you know what? I should be now. What are you suppressing me?
No, I'm disagreeing with you.
So don't be a hypocrite.
Unbelievable. Lewis is mistaking criticism and disagreement for censorship. It's not the same thing. Let me be absolutely clear about that. Right, we've got to get another question now. This is from Ed. Where's Ed? Yeah. Hello, Ed.
Did Anglo-Saxons not exist after all?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. Actually, no, it's a stupid question, but let's talk about it. Because Cambridge University has decided to tackle what it's calling myths of nationalism by teaching students that Anglo-Saxons did not exist. Now, this is going to cause some problems since early medieval history at the university is taught by the Department of Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic. But anyway, what's going to happen? This is beyond stupid.
They did exist. I think they're just trying to argue that they weren't a homogenous group.
Well, no group is a homogenous
Well, this is it, isn't it? You can go to any part of the world if you go back far enough.
Yeah.
Of course, there was mixing and matching. You know, it's very of our time, isn't it? This approach.
Yeah, but Lewis, they say that this is an anti-racist approach, and that I suppose that what they're saying is that. I don't get this. Is it that Anglo-Saxon has been co-opted by sort of racist far-right nationalists? Has it? I don't know.
Yes, you're right. Well, from America, when I was growing up, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant was a WASP.
Yeah.
And they had a particular place in American society of like people who were better than everybody else. They were the upper class. They were the kings and queens of America.
Yes, yes.
And as a New York Jew, we were not part of that. We were like we thought of ourselves as like being down here and they were there, and we hated
Yeah,
them.
no, I get the idea that the Anglo-Saxon can be co-opted by a bunch of idiot racists.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the Anglo-Saxons didn't exist. And that's not the way to sort of deal with that. The way to deal with that, surely, is to deal with racists rather than just revise history and pretend history didn't.
I don't see it as a racial issue. I see the Anglo-Saxons as being an invader, a colonialist group, a group that had mass immigration, which destroyed the indigenous population of Britain. And I think they should be vilified.
You think Anglo-Saxons should be vilified? So we got there in the end. Lewis Schaefer hates the Anglo-Saxons.
For what they did,
and wants them wiped out.
For the invasion of this country.
You've got to let it go. That was a long time ago. Are you going to be having a go at the Vikings next?
Well, do you know something? Let's talk about
that. Oh, no, let's not go there. Unbelievable. OK, next tonight, a counselling service Childline has been accused of giving potentially dangerous advice to children who think they may be transgender. A former Childline counsellor will be here to tell us more.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Children's charity Childline has been heavily criticised recently for giving teenagers who think they may be transgender potentially dangerous advice. Childline provides UK children up to the age of 19 with counselling and advice, and concerning messages have been found on the charity's forums, for example, suggesting girls as young as 14 should administer hormone blockers without telling their parents, and there hasn't been any moderator stepping into those forums. So, James Esses is a former volunteer Childline counsellor. He joins me now. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew.
So, James, before we begin and talk about these forums, let's talk about your background. You were with Childline for a time, weren't you?
I was a counsellor there for about 5 years, weekly. I must have done thousands of hours of counselling of young people.
And what happened there?
I began to get concerned. I mean, I saw more and more children coming through saying that they were trapped in the wrong bodies. That was concerning enough. But I found that Childline were beginning to encourage gender ideology through their counselling methods, through the information they were putting out to young people. Counsellors asking for children's pronouns when they were starting the conversation. I raised concerns with senior management in Childline. And for a time, it seemed as if they were willing to have a conversation. But eventually, it seemed they'd had enough and they gave me the boot.
But surely they must have accepted that to ask a child's pronouns is it's like a test. Are you on board with this religious ideology? And that's a position that they shouldn't be taking as a neutral support mechanism.
Well, quite right, but they don't seem to accept that. They're meant to be non-partisan, and yet I would go in for counselling sessions and see posters from Stonewall, for example, plastered all over the walls. I know that Stonewall have had a real hand in developing some of their training materials, some of their website materials as well.
Yes.
So they seem to be enthralled to this ideology.
But this is very strange, isn't it? Because even in the concept of being born in the wrong body, that's something that many trans organisations now reject. You know, it's something that for a while it was promulgated, but then even mermaids came out and said that's not true. So why is that idea being passed around still?
It's bizarre. You know, we know that gender dysphoria is a mental health condition. Childline is meant to be a neutral, explorative counselling service for children with, including mental health conditions. And yet they seem to be content to push this idea that it is possible to be trapped in the wrong body.
And of course, we've had Mermaids, which is a trans children's charity. They have been investigated because there have been some forums relating to mermaids where they were advising children to use breast binders, for instance, which can cause serious physical damage. So this seems to be something that it's almost like adults imposing an ideology irrespective of child safeguarding.
Correct. You know, at least with mermaids, we know what they're about. They've made that clear from day dot.
Yes.
Childline is a much beloved organisation in this society. It's there to safeguard the most vulnerable children.
OK, well, let's talk about what they've done. We're talking now about these, and you've been posting a lot on Twitter about this, online forums. Now, you've been monitoring these forums through Childline. What have you discovered?
I did a bit of a deep dive. These are all publicly available. Anyone can go onto the Childline website and see these. And there's various gender identity threads in which children, I mean, I say children, but it's quite easy for an adult to go and pretend they're a child and create a profile, are saying things such as giving advice on where to source cheap breast binders, or saying to a child, if your parents don't want you on puberty blockers, go source them behind their back. Or even a thread that I came across in which a young person is saying, I believe that there's a genocide against us. And the responses are from other concerned young people, children, saying, I'd never thought of it like that, but now actually I'm really scared. There is a genocide against us. Childline say that they moderate every single post that goes in these message boards, which tells me that either they're not doing the moderation, which is bad enough, or that they're actually completely fine for this worrying material to
Well, now that's interesting, because so Childline is run by the NSPCC. They've sent us this statement. They say the Childline message boards are a place where young people can express themselves and seek and offer support to each other on any issue or problem. The message board posts are led by young people, and it is not unusual to find diverse or conflicting opinions, as you'll find on any public forum. But James, is it not the case that a child's internet forum ought to be moderated by adults? I mean, are they denying that there? What's going on?
I mean, that's a complete abdication of any duty of care or responsibility, and it's a complete breach of their own policies. I mean, it says it in black and white on the website that every single post is moderated. But we get worse than this. There's a function on Childline called Ask Sam, which is where a young person can write in. Sam is an anonymous Childline counsellor, an adult counsellor. I've come across threads on that, for example, in which a young person said that they don't like their body, They feel like they might be born in the wrong body. The counsellor, rather than exploring it openly, starts to suggest puberty blockers cross sex hormones. I've come across other threads in which a young girl said that she wanted to become a boy but was worried about her fertility in later life. This childline counsellor says, don't worry about it, you can always get a surrogate to carry the baby for you. I mean, this is shocking stuff.
That's unbelievable. That's being very flippant about the fertility of a child in later life. And, you know, this is a point that I've made again and again on this show, and I'm not going to stop making it, which is that the vast majority of children who are referred to gender paediatric clinics tend to be same-sex attracted. I think Hannah Barnes's book said between 80 and 90%. A lot of them are on the autistic spectrum as well. There's all sorts of other reasons which explain why certain children feel a sense of gender dysphoria. So why aren't gay rights groups outraged about this? Because what we're effectively seeing is people fixing gay people through medicalisation.
Because they're not gay rights groups anymore. That's why there's the need for groups like LGB Alliance, because the old historic groups are more concerned by the other letters that have followed on in the alphabet soup over recent years. And these things are completely conflicting with one another. I mean, you're conflating on a day-to-day basis, simply by using the term LGBT, one's sexuality with gender dysphoria, again, a mental health condition.
But then, you know, if it's an adult, say, you know, if an adult feels, for whatever reason, they want to undertake surgery, for whatever reason they want to change their body, in a liberal society, you know, there might be mental health issues there and other issues that you might want to explore, but ultimately in a liberal society, adults get to do what they want, right?
Yes, which is why I've never said that I would call for a ban on all of these surgical procedures or medical procedures for adults. But for children, it's completely different. And, I mean, it's a strange place we live in. If a child can't buy a scratch card or have a pint in the pub, but can consent to irreversible bodily changes.
Yes.
I mean, and potentially infertility in later life as well. I mean, it's crazy.
And you've been speaking out about this for a long time now, and you've had a lot of consequences, haven't you, for doing so?
I have. I was doing a master's degree in psychotherapy. I was 3 years into this, on the cusp of setting up a private practice, and I was expelled over an email. I was told that I brought them into disrepute. I'm now having to take them to the Employment Tribunal for discrimination. But yeah, I mean, my whole kind of future life plan has been, well, it evaporated overnight.
And what I don't understand about this is why can a conversation not happen? We're dealing with the safeguarding of children, so surely that should be the top priority. How can it possibly be that so many major institutions have just bought into this without stopping to think and thinking maybe we're doing more harm than good here?
I've racked my brain with that, Andrew, and I think for some people they genuinely believe they're doing the right thing. For others, they're too scared to speak out. For some, they just want an easy life. And for some, I think they may well be pure evil. But I've come to the conclusion that I don't really care what the reasoning is anymore, because the outcome, which is harm to our children, happens every time.
James Estes, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you.
So, next, coming up on Free Speech Nation, best-selling author Michael Schellenberger will be here to tell us more about the counter-disinformation team set up by the UK government. Don't go away.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Is watching.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Later in the show, I'm going to be turning agony uncle with the help of my panel, Cressida Wetton and Lewis Schaefer. We're going to help you at home deal with your unfiltered dilemmas. So do email us at gbviews@gbnews.com and we'll do our best to answer all of your most personal problems. As discussed earlier, it has been reported in The Telegraph that during the pandemic, the government worked in tandem with social media companies to try and silence critics of its lockdown policies. This so-called counter-disinformation unit was designed to tackle domestic threats and secretly monitored critics of the government, with their social media posts apparently being blocked from being widely circulated. Author Michael Schellenberger joins me now to discuss this. Michael, welcome to Free Speech Nation.
Good to be with you, Andrew.
Michael, you were one of the journalists that was entrusted to leak the Twitter files in the US. Could you just tell us a bit about that? Because over there we saw that there was evidence, wasn't there, of some kind of collusion between the US authorities and the social media giants.
Sure. So what we discovered in the Twitter files is extremely similar to what occurred in Great Britain, as reported by The Telegraph yesterday, but also had been previously reported in what I believe The Telegraph had called the lockdown files, including emails from one of your government ministers, Hancock, to Facebook executive Nick Clegg. Very similar dynamic here, with White House officials putting direct pressure on Facebook to censor what Facebook called often true posts, including around posts around vaccine side effects that they feared would cause vaccine hesitancy. In the Twitter files, we discovered that there was a large operation run by U.S. government agencies, including Department of Homeland Security, that interacted with private sector NGOs that then flagged social media posts, disfavored social media posts that they wanted Twitter and Facebook to censor, and they reported very high levels of compliance, somewhere between 20 and 50%. Compliance. And what was really satisfying about the Telegraph reporting yesterday is that it verified that everything that we had found had also occurred in Britain. I mean, that's not good news, but it had come at a time when people were suggesting that what we had discovered was very innocent government flagging of social media posts and not censorship. I think what you see in both countries is very heavy-handed pressure by governments on the social media companies to censor these disfavored views, many of which were
among some of the Twitter files that were released, there were emails that were showing how members of the Democrat Party were flagging certain tweets saying, could we deal with these, take these down? To be fair, the Republicans were at it as well. But of course, because Silicon Valley didn't align with the Republican worldview, not as many of those were actioned. I mean, this kind of thing is incredibly serious, isn't it? And why is it the case that this did not get as much coverage as it ought to have done in the media? Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the media is part of the problem in many cases. It's part of what you would call the censorship industrial complex, which I should add, we are coming to Britain on June 22nd at 7 p.m. in Central Hall, Westminster, to expose at greater length, in part because we think that the United States and Great Britain have historically defended free speech as people of English-speaking nations that have a significant role in shaping how governments around the world think about this, how people around the world think about this. So I think that the media has really failed. I was extremely happy to see the Telegraph's reporting. I think that the story will increasingly come out because it's clear there was a major government effort in the United States, in Great Britain, across the EU, and it's now happening around the world where there has been significant censorship over the last 3 years of disfavored views that were often very accurate, including telling people's personal experiences of an experimental drug's side effect, one that we might think had more benefits than harms. And I certainly took the vaccine myself, but nonetheless, it's been in the public interest to fight for knowing the side effects of drugs over the last several decades. So to see the media just play cheerleader while accepting significant amounts of money. You may know Pfizer invested many tens of millions of dollars in advertising, which all those media companies took. And then, of course, they have a direct competitive interest in not allowing alternative media, where in social media, they want the advertising money for themselves. So I think there was a lot of reasons why the advertisers, or why the mainstream news media have ignored the story to date.
But in a sense, you can understand, and I don't approve of it, but you can understand websites like YouTube and places that are themselves have an ideological point of view, censoring certain things that don't align with it. It's completely wrong, but you know where they're coming from. Why? But when it comes to a government, I mean, you're describing a worldwide trend among governments to actually limit the scope of potential conversations. Why would that be the case? Why won't governments accept that more discussion about these things is best?
Well, it certainly appears that in English language nations, including Britain and the United States, really after 2016, there, in the wake of Brexit and the election of Trump, there was an effort by military and intelligence organizations in both Britain and the United States, including NGOs that they work very closely with, to work with to basically demand greater censorship. And they were doing it through various causes. So it included election denialism in the United States. It's included COVID vaccines and also COVID origins. It's included now the war in Ukraine, which, whatever you think of it, we should have a free debate about. It's included climate change. And now the latest thing is so-called hate speech, which we have shown that there is really no evidence that any incidents of hate on any significant levels are increasing in the Western world. But yet in all of these countries, Britain, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, the excuse is being used that there is more hate online as a way to demand greater censorship. So we see basically elites looking for reasons to justify greater censorship. In some ways, it gives the sense that the ultimate goal is just to have a censorship apparatus that they have greater control over, and they're using these issues in order to establish that apparatus.
I mean, the way you say that, it sounds like you think this has been designed this way. I mean, my feeling might be that it might be just well-intentioned people getting it really wrong. I mean, the name of this unit was the Disinformation Unit. And what if these people have actually believed themselves that this stuff is disinformation, that these things are not up for debate? Or do you think it's more sinister than that?
Well, there's definitely an organic element of self-censorship that you've documented and we've documented here in the United States. This organic demand that people use particular pronouns, for example, that people use language in particular ways that can sometimes be quite ridiculous. That's a very real phenomenon that comes from the culture. I don't think anybody doubts that that's real. But what we have also seen is government agencies, certainly in the United States, using that sort of what you might call cultural wokeism, a kind of political correctness, particularly around so-called hate speech, race, but also climate change, certainly COVID and election denialism, and using those justifications for censorship, just because you're looking, if you want to justify censorship, you have to point to real world harm. And so what that cultural wokeism does is it provides what you might call a predicate for censorship, and they keep seeking out new predicates.
Isn't it interesting, though, that anyone who knows anything about the history of censorship knows full well that the very worst thing you can do with bad ideas is to suppress them, because they fester and they grow. And I've seen some pretty crazy conspiracy theories regarding the COVID pandemic. But if anything, these things, it strikes me, have proliferated precisely because these kind of reports come out showing that governments have been curtailing speech. What do you think of that?
Well, certainly it's called, there's something called the Barbara Streisand effect, because when she tried to prevent the publication of photos of her house in California, everybody wanted to look at the photographs. I also would point out that there is no movement for human liberation in the history of humankind, whether from slavery or the women's right to vote or any civil rights movement, that has ever demanded censorship. It's always been the opposite. They've always demanded their right to speak. So to see groups that are claiming to want censorship in the name of human freedom or of democracy, you know that they are obviously totalitarian or authoritarian at a minimum in their intentions, and that those aren't good intentions. Those are poor intentions. And so I think we're at risk of seeing a kind of, psychopathology that's been in the culture for a long time being taken advantage of by some state actors with taxpayer money to demand that we not be allowed for ourselves what information we should decide to believe and not believe, which has been the tradition in our countries for over 250 years.
But given that we're now in the digital age, how can we possibly tackle this? I mean, it looks like the only way we can do so is if we rely on the world's richest people to buy up platforms and force them to accept free speech and to leak the documents that show the extent of the suppression that was going on. But there's only one Elon Musk, and this isn't going to happen again and again. I mean, is this a sort of lost cause?
Well, we don't think so. I think that, the most important thing is that the vast majority of people in the United States and in Britain, and I believe around the world, would like to have very strong free speech protections like we have in the United States, where we have a First Amendment. We do not allow the government to regulate speech. It's a very strong level of protection. We think that that ought to be the standard worldwide, that the social media companies must take that standard worldwide, and that the content moderation decisions that they inevitably make should simply be reported, since more speech is the solution, not less speech or censorship. And so we are, as I mentioned, building a free speech movement around the world. Many of the people that you would have thought that would have been on the side of more free speech have actually been demanding censorship, sadly and ironically. And so we are coming to London on June 22nd to the 23rd. We're doing an event at 7 p.m. on June 22nd with Russell Brand at Central Hall, Westminster, to really build this movement, because really the United States and Britain are the heart of the global movement that's existed for hundreds of years to demand greater free speech rights. And we want to see citizens demanding very high First Amendment levels of free speech for all of our countries around the world, whether they're in the West and English speaking, or they're in places like India and Turkey, which are also governments demanding censorship. So we think ultimately there needs to be a citizens movement.
Well, this sounds very, very important to me. I'm glad to hear you're coming to London, June 22nd. I think people should definitely go along if they're able to do so. Michael Schellenberger, thanks ever so much for joining me.
Thanks very much, Andrew.
So that's all we've got time for at the moment, but do join us after the break on Free Speech Nation, where I'll be speaking to Ella Whelan about the protests which disrupted Kathleen Stock's speech at the Oxford Union last week.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Activist Riz Posnet disrupted a speech by gender-critical feminist Kathleen Stock to the Oxford Union Debating Society earlier this week. Wearing a T-shirt which read, "No more dead trans kids," Posnet glued herself to the floor before being removed by police. Posnet has been praised in many quarters for her stunt, and she said, quote, "I respect Kathleen's right to free speech, but I'm also painfully aware of the consequences of her anti-trans propaganda. Her career and image is built around misinformation and fear-mongering. The consequences of Stock's message and the broader media hate campaign are extensive. Trans people in the UK are stigmatised, threatened and harassed." Ella Whelan, journalist, author of What Women Want, joins me now. Welcome to the show. Ella, I just read that statement by the activist Riz Posnet. First thing to say is it all seems factually incorrect.
Yes, I mean, well, it's outrageous to suggest that there is a direct link between Kathleen Stock making arguments or writing books about women's rights, gender issues, or even anything to do with trans rights or trans people, that there would be a direct link between that and the death of trans people, as she was suggesting. That's completely outrageous and untrue. I think Kathleen Stock is blue in the face, saying that actually most of the time she doesn't talk about trans people, she's talking about women. And so there's a kind of horrible irony in that. But also there is this sort of slightly humorous kind of suggestion that in one of the parts of her statement is that Kathleen Stock's comments are linked to waiting times and gender reaffirming surgery or treatment, which is, I mean, that's slightly letting the NHS off the hook, but there's a kind of...
Yes, I mean, it seems very histrionic. And, you know, the thing about that is she also says that she's anti-trans rights and this kind... That's factually wrong as well. I mean, Kathleen Stock has repeatedly asserted the importance for trans people to have equal rights as everyone else.
Yes, and it kind of gets irritating having to constantly reiterate that as a woman, because you who's trying to talk about women's spaces. I'm sure it must take off Kathleen Stock, who's asked to talk about this all the time. But I think you have to kind of take a step back and say, are we meant to seriously engage? The minute I saw the T-shirt,
yes,
I thought, I'm not going to be seriously engaging with this person, because if you are, in actual fact, weaponising death or suicide or whatever it is that you're suggesting trans people are dying of, in order to shut down a speaker, then for me, you've already lost the argument.
But that happens again and again with activists sort of saying to parents of children who might have are struggling with their gender identity that all of a sudden they're told, unless you put these kids on puberty blockers, they will kill themselves. What would you prefer, a dead kid or a kid on medication?
Which is incredibly irresponsible, because if we are to believe the sort of, you know, the kind of panic that we've got at the moment about young people accessing social media, particularly vulnerable young people who might be feeling messed up about their identity. And if you're one of those young people and you look and you see the argument that if you don't get the pills you want or the therapy you want or wherever it is, that you are likely to kill yourself, then, you know, as a suggestible, vulnerable young person, that's not a message you should be seeing. So it's almost like we're kind of speaking into action what we don't want to happen by creating this kind of, you know, histrionic response around the idea that we would have a debate about, you know, things that are pretty normal, like whether or not who you would allow into a prison, who you would allow into a changing room, things like that shouldn't be the cause of someone taking their own life.
Now, part of the problem, of course, is that activists refuse to discuss. Stonewall's mantra for so long was no debate. But that's why this is fundamental misunderstanding. On the one hand, you've got activists for whom the idea of male and female, man and woman, these are identity categories. And then you've got feminists for whom, or not just feminists, but 99% of human beings, for whom male and female are biological classifications, biological categories. How can a discussion even happen when two people have completely different definitions?
Well, I'm starting to think it's a little bit like, and it's going to sound harsh to people of faith here, but I'm starting to think it's a little bit like when you try to have a row with someone who believes in God when you don't believe in God. There's only so far you can get until you have to both say, OK, and now we've met our limit because I've cannot get on board with what you're saying. And I think the kind of, you know, the trans rights activists kind of gender ideology has gotten to that point where it is a kind of new religion where there is just either you believe it or you don't.
Yes.
And as you said, a lot of it isn't based in reality. But the interesting thing about the no debate stuff is that in response to Riz's protest, there were lots of people, a lot of irritating academics as it happens, piling in and saying, but this is free speech. Come on, you free speech warriors. This is free speech. She should be allowed to stay there. Kathleen Stock can do her talk and Riz stays there. And, you know, that's a free society, which is just ridiculous. I mean, you know, speaking as someone, as you know, who organises the Battle of Ideas Festival, I know what happens when you run an event. And you're not, you know, you're not allowed, you're not meant to be OK with someone just coming in, sitting on the table or on the floor in front of you and messing up your whole event. That's not protest. It's a really infantile way of looking at what protest actually means. And anyone who's done a stunt like that knows you do it, you go in, you try and make as much, you know, noise, song and dance, and then you get moved on and you understand that you are going to get moved on. Because the interesting thing about the sort of this trans argument is that they say there is no debate, and any kind of good protest is actually a debate, because what you're meant to be doing on a sort of successful political protest is winning people to your cause. And unfortunately, I think a bit kind of like Extinction Rebellion, those kind of protesters, a lot of these trans rights activists don't want to convince the general public about their point of view. They just want to throw their toys out of the pram.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? There's one thing protesting against something which I'm sure we would both support, but it's another thing to disrupt so that other people can't hear. You've even had protesters punching gender-critical feminists in the face to try and get them resorting to violence. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of what a liberal society is meant to be, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, assault isn't protest.
Right.
But you know, but on the other hand, a protest is supposed to be disruptive. I've done lots of things myself throughout my university career where you went in and just obnoxious things like started clapping really loudly and things like that. But you understood that you then got moved on. Nobody sat in the middle of the floor and said, how dare you? I have a right to be here. Because we weren't, thankfully at least, I mean, even in this scenario, we weren't so narcissistic as thinking that the world... I think this is a real problem with the current approach to protest, you know, related to the eco stuff, but also this, is that there is just this sense of I am the centre of the universe and what's going on around me doesn't matter. When in actual fact, to reiterate the point, any kind of good protest or any kind of good stunt interacts with the world around you. And so, you know, this isn't your sitting room. You're not allowed to just stay here. If you're going to get kicked out.
Well, it feels authoritarian because, you know, tyrants don't debate. They say no debate, do what I say. And that's what these people are doing, right?
Yeah, they're saying that the very presence of a debate, that Kathleen Stock's literal physical bodily presence in a room is threatening to them. Actually, if you go back to that documentary that detailed the talk that she gave at Cambridge University, where she was at the debating society, and she said, "I'm not even meant to be here to talk about gender ideology. Actually, it was about sort of offence and free speech and more general things. But the very fact that this witch, as they see her, was on campus meant that they all lost their minds. I mean, maybe she does have supernatural powers. I don't know, because she seems to make a lot of people lose it, but not for the kind of, they don't engage with the ideas that she has. I think that's a terrible shame.
Ella Whelan, thanks very much for joining me. That's it for our first hour, but please don't go away. We've got a lot more coming between now and 9 o'clock. See you in a moment.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's plenty more still to come on Free Speech Nation this week, including more audience questions, this week's social sensations, and we'll be answering your unfiltered dilemmas. But first, let's get the news headlines from Bethany Elsey.
Andrew, thank you. Hello, I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Immigration Minister says the UK's asylum system is riddled with abuse and that the government must reduce its reliance on hotels to house migrants. It's after protests were held outside a hotel in central London where migrants were asked to sleep 4 to a room. Speaking to Camilla Tominey, Robert Jenrick said it's wrong for migrants to demand better accommodation while their asylum claims are processed. He also also said the UK is spending £6 million a day on hotels and that asking migrants to share a room is necessary to get value for taxpayers' money.
Remember, these are migrants who have said they are destitute. They've said that they have absolutely nowhere to stay, no friends, no family, no money, and the taxpayer is stepping up and providing them with good quality accommodation and board and lodgings. And so, you know, I think those migrants are wrong to protest and say that they deserve to have single bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms and so on. And I'm pleased to see that common sense seems to have prevailed in this case.
Dorset police have named the 17-year-old boy who died after getting into difficulty in the water off Bournemouth Beach on Wednesday. Joe Abbess from Southampton died after being pulled from the sea. In a statement, his family said they were heartbroken and devastated, describing him as a fabulous young man. A 12-year-old girl named in reports as Suna Khan from High Wycombe in Buckinghamshire also died in the incident, which involved 10 swimmers. A sightseeing boat named the Dorset Belle has been impounded by police. A man has been charged after allegedly wearing a shirt to the FA Cup final yesterday, which appeared to have an offensive reference to the Hillsborough disaster. 33-year-old James White from Warwickshire has been charged with displaying threatening or abusive writing. He's expected to appear at Wilston Magistrates Court next week. 97 Liverpool fans died in 1989 at Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield. Authorities in India say a signal problem was likely responsible for the country's worst train crash in decades. 275 people were killed in the accident. Another 1,200 were injured when a passenger train hit a stationary freight train before derailing and striking a second passenger train. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has vowed to punish anyone found responsible. And a Labour MP has told GB News victims are too scared to complain about sexual predators in Parliament. Charlotte Nichols said harassment is baked into every single part of how Westminster operates. She also accused the Labour Party of choosing not to act on concerns raised about a number of colleagues over a very long period. Her comments come after she revealed being handed a list of 30 MPs she should avoid when first becoming an MP. You're up to date on GB News. Now let's get back to Free Speech Nation.
And welcome back to Free Speech Nation. We're going to start this section of the show with some questions from our audience. This one is from Cassia. We have a Cassia here. Hello.
Hiya. Should talking to Ken Loach stop you from becoming a candidate for mayor?
OK, so this is an interesting one. So Labour's North of Tyne mayor, Jamie Driscoll, has been blocked from their list of candidates for the first ever North East mayoral election. It's been suggested that Driscoll has been barred because he appeared at an event with film director and expelled Labour member Ken Loach, which was in Newcastle earlier this year. Labour said certain candidates, quote, did not meet the threshold required, but didn't go any further than that. This seems shrouded in mystery, doesn't it, Cressida? What's going on?
I don't know what's going on. I mean, on the one hand, I think let him in because then people can vote for him. That's the point. On the other hand, of course, Labour are entitled to say, we don't want you. Well, I suppose they are, but isn't it a bit strange that it's just based on the fact that he appeared on a panel with someone who had defended certain people that some people in Labour don't like? Well, I would say so, except it's 2023 and people do get very nervous about being seen with the wrong people, don't they? So I don't find that surprising in this day and age. But it's not like he was on a panel with, like, Abu Hamza or something. Like, I think, like, it's well, Ken Loach, a sort of acclaimed director, and yeah. I don't know, maybe he said some things that people don't like, but it's not like ideas are contaminated. It's not like if you're on a panel with someone, you become the same. I hope not, because we've got Lewis. Well, exactly. I was trying not to say it. That's exactly what I was thinking. So my understanding of this is that certain Labour had expelled certain groups which they perceived to be anti-Semitic. Yeah. Ken Loach was saying he didn't support that. He thought it was a witch hunt. Yeah. And because he said that, and then this guy, Jamie Driscoll, sat on a panel with him. Yeah.
So this is almost like 3 removed forms of contamination, isn't it?
Well, first of all, as a Jew, they're always blaming the Jews in some way or another. The Jews made us do this. It's like the devil made us do it. The Jews made us get rid of this guy. And so...
I haven't said that, by the way.
But basically, that's what... No, I know you haven't said it, but that's basically what they're saying. They're saying, we didn't want to take away, we didn't want this. We love Jamie Driscoll, is what they're saying. But Ken Loach hung out with somebody who was against the Jews. So it's basically, if there were no Jews...
I have to say, for defamation purposes, he would deny that he hung out with people who hate the Jews. I think, but the point is, the point is here that we have some. I understand as well that there was anti-Semitism in Labour that wasn't being tackled, but the feeling I think is that there's now a hyper sensitivity to it. Is that possible?
There might be. I think what this is a very simple situation. Labour's been out of power for so long, and they're just gagging for it, and they want to win. They want to make sure that they win. And this Keir Starmer guy strikes me as a real macho alpha.
Really? He never struck me like that.
It just strikes me as a very, you can see he's just so meaty and fleshy and just very manly.
I think a lot of that's your fantasy, which we won't go into, but there's a lot of this, Cressida, is really about that there's this war within Labour. You know, there's the left of the party, there's the right of the party, and it seems to be, some of it is focused around the anti-Semitism issue, which makes sense, because there clearly were problems. But then when it comes to this issue of Jamie Driscoll, this I think has just confused a lot of people on all sides of the political divide. But there was a new rule that Labour put in 2022 in their party rule book, and it said this. It said, neither the principles of natural justice nor the provisions of fairness in Chapter 2, Clause 11.8 shall apply to the termination of party membership pursuant to Chapter 2, etc., etc. In other words, we can get rid of whoever we want, however we want, whenever we want, without explaining it. Now, that doesn't look good to me.
No, what a strange thing to want to put in there in the first place.
It is. Well, it's a means to justify expelling anyone for whatever reason.
Yeah, which is what they do. I mean, whether, I don't know, is this final or might there be some pushback?
Well, it's all clouded in mystery. We just don't know, do we?
Well, I think it is the problem of the way Parliament is set up in this country is there's no independence. It's like a rugby match. All the players have to be in a row in order for the team to be successful. There's no like a soccer player who goes up ahead and waits, whatever, and takes control of the ball. So all the ducks have to be in the row. And that's what I think Storm is.
But getting rid of someone because they sat on a panel with someone doesn't affect those ducks, does it?
It's indicative.
Let's look at that principle, though. If I were to interview someone who I completely disagree with, as I have, does that make me contaminated with that person's views? I've spoken to people who've said some horrendous things.
Yes. Well, I don't. You are. In a way, a journalist. Okay?
In a way, a journalist. I'll take that.
In a way, a journalist. You've got too much of an agenda and too many opinions. But
I do have too many opinions.
Yeah, you've got too many opinions to be a true journalist.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, that's fine. But the Labour Party wants people to go in a row with them. They want to believe. And the fact that this guy, it's like this. I'm walking in the woods. It's Nazi Germany, 1942 or something. And I see a group of guys, and they're whistling Wagner. All right?
OK. Where is this going?
It's going to the point where I'm saying they're whistling Wagner.
So
maybe as a Jew, maybe as a Jew, I shouldn't be hanging out with them.
Yes.
It's not that Wagner is so bad, but they like those people.
A lot of people like Wagner. A lot of Jewish people like Wagner.
Well, now they do. I think the memories are.
But maybe at the time it was a bit more sensitive.
Was that a bad analogy?
No, it was an interesting analogy. I was just nervous about where you were going to take it. Anyway, we're going to get a couple of questions from our viewers now. So we've got a question from Donald. This is on email. Donald says, is it now OK to complain about males in women's changing rooms? OK, this is an ongoing thing, of course, but this is to do with the Vermont school district, which actually punished a father and his daughter. She was getting changed in a locker room, and there was someone, biological male, getting changed with her, and this upset her, and she complained about it. And rather than addressing the issue of a male in the girls' changing room, they punished her, they sacked him, because the father was, I think he was the football coach, and they attacked the girl. I mean, that's mad, right?
You would think, wouldn't you? I mean, you really would.
But this is Canada, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, it's close to Canada. It's Vermont.
Is that not Canada? I don't know my geography, and neither do you, so...
So confident.
Yeah. Go on.
What was the question?
Why is this going on?
Why is this going on?
Shouldn't teenage girls be entitled to get changed without...
absolutely. I mean, I struggle to come up with an argument because to me it's just obvious, the idea that you would... I mean, of course that man's going to feel protective of his daughter.
Yes.
You know, it's...
Isn't it a weird one, Lewis? With the fact that the courts would side with it, you know, we've got the right result now eventually. Right. But the very fact that the school would be like, "Are you complaining about the fact that you have to see male genitalia in the changing rooms? Get out. You're the one that's to blame."
Well,
it's like someone flashing someone and saying, "Oh, well, you're to blame if you look." It's sort of like that, isn't it?
Well, aren't they?
No, they're not, Lewis. That's a ridiculous argument.
No, I see the side of it. It's like right now people believe in trans rights. They believe that trans women are women, and it's better not to hurt people's feelings than it is to alienate.
What about the feelings of the girl?
Is unfortunately in this, I think you've pointed it out many times. Is it intersectionality? Is that a woman's feelings?
They're pretty low on
are a bit lower, or not really low, but they're a bit lower than a trans woman's.
That's not right, is it?
Well, no, it's not right, and it's now been overturned, changed. We're back.
Yeah.
To what we think of as a reasonable argument. So I feel like, is the tide changing a bit on some of this?
Is it? Well, it's interesting because Matt Walsh's film, What is a Woman, that was put out on Twitter the other day, and I think it's been seen like 150 million times. Yeah. Even that, and I know a lot of people have reservations about his point of view on many things, but the key message of that film is precisely what you're saying, is that, you know, we have to acknowledge biological reality, surely.
Why?
Because we have to acknowledge... I know you don't like to acknowledge reality, Lewis, but there's all sorts of ways in which it's important. It's important in terms of safeguarding, it's important in terms of rights, it's important in terms of women's sports, it's important in terms of women's prisons, domestic violence refuge centres, hospitals. I mean, the list goes on.
Well, I have a list myself of reasons why it's not.
No, you don't, Lewis.
I don't have a
just being a contrarian is...
No, I'm not. I'm saying those things all make sense to me.
They do, I know.
But in terms of other people, they don't make sense. At the end of the day, that being nice to trans women takes priority.
Yeah, but there's also... No, you're wrong about that.
There's
also... Well, you're forgetting that there's also a lot of trans people who are also on my side of the argument in this.
Right, but there was also a lot of Jews who think that Jews are bad, whatever. You know what I mean?
It's not quite the same, is it?
It could be the same. It could be the same. But you're saying is you are seeing this that a priori, it's wrong what is happening.
It's wrong to demonise a teenage girl, who's upset about being forced to get changed next to a naked man, yes.
Yeah, but what would happen, just sort of turn it on its head? It's like, maybe some people should be offended. Some people have a right, you have a right to offend.
It's not convincing me.
Not children. I think generally we think children don't need to be offended. I mean, other than go to bed, it's bedtime.
They do get offended by that.
The trans woman trans girl is also a child. It's probably the same age. I mean, it's about you. You're very dogmatic in this. You're seeing it from this side. I'm just saying the other side, in their mind, has a completely valid view.
I disagree with that. And the reason I disagree with that is because that side of the argument, the one that you're presenting, involves a complete repudiation of reality. And that's not something that I'm prepared to do. I think ultimately we have to accept that some things are real and some things are not. Some things are fantasy.
Your religion is that reality is better
the religion of reality.
Yes.
I subscribe to that.
Cressida, what do you think? Is my notion that we have to acknowledge reality a religion? It's like that gravity. What's all that about?
Oh, gravity. Yeah. I mean, well,
should we just forget? I mean, Lewis should be floating up.
Every January, I think gravity can't be real after the Christmas.
I would say, Lewis, that's enough from you. But I think both sides have presented an argument, and I think, let's be honest, we all know which one is weaker. OK, so we're going to move on to an email from Joan, and Joan says, "Is accidentally being seen getting dressed cause for dismissal?" OK, so this is to do with the full Monty. I mean, you'll have seen this. I think you'll have seen this. Is the actor Hugo Spear. He lost his job on the TV version of the full Monty. They had to sort of rewrite the series halfway through because he wasn't in there. And he was dismissed because a runner entered his trailer while he was getting changed. He says he called out asking her to wait and that he hid behind a wardrobe. So what's going on here, Lewis? It feels like he's been really put through it.
Well, I read the thing, and obviously you're someone who's never been fired from a job.
I think after tonight I might be.
Yeah. And we don't know why the guy was fired. He could have been. It's the same way, like with, I hate to mention that guy's name, Philip Schofield, but people didn't like him, and they're finding reasons. This is what I believe. I don't know.
So what you're saying with Hugo Spear is we don't know what happened, but what we have got is his testimony, which has come out, which it's pretty distressing. If what he's saying is true, It's really unfair, isn't it?
There's a complete lack of investigation. There's an email chain or something where somebody's said, "Oh, the investigation," in quote marks,
Yes.
which is extremely worrying, isn't it? I mean...
So it wasn't so much an investigation as much as a knee-jerk, you know, there was this complaint made.
Yeah.
It's perfectly possible, isn't it, that two people had completely different perspectives of what happened.
Absolutely.
But surely some sort of procedure...
there's no process. It's very much like Sadowitz in Edinburgh, isn't it? It feels like one person has taken offence, and that's the end of it, before there's a discussion about whether that's reasonable or in this case, whether it even happened in quite the way.
I have to say, like, reading his testimony, it sounds incredibly upsetting, the idea that someone can make an accusation, there's no investigation, then you're out. Right. That shouldn't... if you're taking accusations for proof, that's an authoritarian thing to do, isn't it?
No, this is what happens in business. This is human nature. People get fired from jobs for reasons you're not liked. My mother used to say, they hire you because you're competent, they fire you because they don't like you. And that's possibly what it could be. This sounds just like a reverse of the Me Too thing, where it's like you just believe the guy. I mean, it might be true. It sounds...
He was there for 30 years with a clean reputation. This isn't somebody getting hired for 6 weeks, minutes, I don't know, and getting thrown out. I mean, he'd got a good long...
But he was crying, and the thing, he was crying, his wife was saying, oh, we can't sleep at night, it's all sorts of horribleness. And at the end of the day, you just...
There is, though, a certain amount of scepticism that is required when it comes to accusations, insofar as we're not saying we're going to not believe anyone, but we're going to impartially investigate. And that should be the way that... I mean, this was... The excesses of the Me Too movement had the same thing, just automatically assuming... Operation Midland is a very good example with Operation Midland.
Absolutely. The more serious the crime, the more detail and the more difficult the investigation is going to be, isn't it? Grey areas are a good thing.
You know, when the Scotland Yard came out and said the accusations by Carl Beach against these various high-ranking politicians, they described them as credible and true, but they were lies. Right? And some people died not knowing they'd been cleared. I mean, it's very serious stuff.
But this is a private company, Andrew.
But we still have tribunal laws here, and you can't just fire someone for no good reason. There has to be an investigation.
Which there should be. You should be able to fire anybody. We don't want you around.
That's your stupid American
No,
stuff.
it is.
OK, moving on now to our next question. This is from a Twitter account. This is Angelique. Angelique says, is it racist to give a film a bad review? So this is an odd one. So there are various sort of internet sites where they give various reviews. The public can submit reviews. And this one is IMDb, and they've got their entry on The Little Mermaid. This is the live-action remake of The Little Mermaid. There have been lots and lots of bad reviews. And they've said these are racist reviews because they cast a black actress in the lead role. Now, it's interesting in this one, Lewis, because I looked at some of the reviews that were actually quoted. None of them were racist. So what they're saying is they assume they're motivated by racist, whereas these people are just saying they didn't like the film. What do you think?
Well, I think people should be allowed to review a film whatever they want to, and you don't know what systemic, chronic racism they have in their brains.
But they've actually taken those reviews off the site.
Yes.
They're saying we don't believe that these reviews are in good faith.
And IMDb is a private company, and they should be allowed to eliminate reviews and reevaluate as they see fit. But we, as free citizens, not really, but we as free citizens have a right to go, you know, we don't trust IMDb anymore, and their stock prices go down.
Well, that's the problem. We won't be able to trust reviews, will we, if they just take down the ones they don't?
Can you ever trust anything? There's no trust in this world. There's no such thing as gravity.
Yeah, I know, Lewis. I knew you were going to get there eventually.
From him saying the death of love.
Yeah. It is.
So Cressida, but this is an interesting one. It reminds me a bit of when The Last Jedi came out. And all the critics raved about it. They said it's one of those Star Wars films.
I've heard of Star Trek or Wars, but I've never watched them.
I'll give you the principle. So it was a film that came out, absolutely terrible film, objectively bad. And the critics loved it because it was very kind of woke and very kind of progressive. And all the fans hated it. So on these websites, you had like 0% ratings from the fans and 100% from the critics. And it was just mad. You know, I think just let people speak, let people express, including the critics who were wrong.
Do you think there's a bit of go woke, go broke here, that people are just purposely rubbishing the film? I don't mean from a racist perspective, but if they feel that they see it as a very woke piece of art.
But why is it woke anyway? Like,
I don't know.
So what if it's a black actress playing it? She's a mermaid. Like, it's not like you have a fixed thing of what... You know, this is someone...
And if somebody leaves a review that's negative about this woman with gills that happen to be black, and you interpret that negative review as only being about her race, aren't you the racist?
Right, so there's... OK, you can look at it both ways, I suppose. I just don't care about her getting cast in that role. Maybe she's really good.
I know you don't. But what you should be saying is you can't trust anybody.
That's what you say. You have an essential thing in your life.
Yeah.
An essential problem. You don't trust anyone.
And how can you? I watched this show. I've been on the show. You can't trust anything. You can't trust the leaders. You can't trust the scientists.
Do you trust me, Lewis?
Believe it or not, I do. That's
That's your one flaw, and you will get your comeuppance sooner or later, believe you me. Okay, so next on Free Speech Nation.
Is that what you call it?
Yes, that's right. Now, look, after the break, I am going to be taking a look at how the Pride flag has developed over the years. Don't forget, it is Pride Month now. Anyway, don't go anywhere.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Remember when the Pride flag made sense? It was designed by an American artist called Gilbert Baker in 1978. It was originally an 8-striped rainbow, but was soon refined into the 6-striped version that was the norm for many decades. At a time when gay people couldn't hold hands with their partners on the street, this flag served a useful purpose. It meant that you could easily find gay pubs or other places where no one had to pretend to be something they weren't. The rainbow symbol was a simple and effective concept that conveyed positivity and unity. And then some activists came along and said, hang on a minute, why are there no black or brown stripes in the rainbow flag? See, for some reason, they were under the impression that the gay flag was a literal representation of the range of skin colours that are acceptable in the community. And so we got this. OK, then, I mean, well, there weren't any white stripes in the original one either, but most people understood that it was symbolic, that we were all included already, irrespective of our race. But then after this, trans activists came along and said, why aren't we in there? So we got this one. And this was the chevron with the pink, white and blue, which was based on the trans flag. But surely this eyesore couldn't get any worse, could it? Well, it could, because activists were then concerned that it was excluding intersex people, so they added this symbol. OK, it's getting a bit out of control now, but then last year, some bright spark added a red umbrella to represent sex workers. Now, if you thought this was getting out of hand, last year then we had Microsoft. They designed a new version to incorporate all the other multiple sexualities and genders that have been invented over the past few years. Let's have a look at that. I mean, what the hell is it? It looks like a spaceship going at warp speed through a Care Bear's bumhole. Identity politics in its current form is an ever-expanding beast. Pride used to be just one day, then it was a month, and now Pride events have been scheduled all the way from March through to September. As one sign in a shoe shop pointed out, Pride never stops, if only it would. The initialism as well, that's expanded too. First we had LGB, and then it became LGBT, then LGBTQ, then LGBTQIA. The Canadian government currently favours 2S LGBTQIA+, although even its Prime Minister finds that a bit of a mouthful.
I will never apologise for standing up for an LGBTQ2+ kids' rights to not have to undergo conversion therapy.
Similarly, Pride started out as an important protest against injustice. When the original Pride March took place in London in 1972, homosexuality had only been legal for 5 years, and the prospect of gay marriage or even an equal age of consent seemed impossible. Only 2,000 people turned up to these protests. But by contrast, the Pride Parade in London in 2022 attracted over 1 million. And of course, most of those people aren't even gay. It's become a family day out, a huge party. And what's so wrong with that, you might ask? And that's a fair question. If people are celebrating and having a good time, that's great. Except that's not necessarily what's going on. Increasingly, gay people no longer feel welcome at Pride. I spoke to a representative from a lesbian group on this show last year who had been moved along by police when trying to protest at Pride. But isn't Pride meant to be a protest, not a party? I mean, what's going on? The answer is that Pride has been hijacked, not once, but twice. First by avaricious multi-billion-dollar corporations who are able to pose as virtuous by posting the Pride flag, only they don't do it in the branches in countries where homosexuality is still illegal. After all, you wouldn't want to fly the flag anywhere which might actually make a difference. I'm old enough to remember that corporations were certainly not celebrating Pride quite so openly before Section 28 was repealed in 2003, or before the age of consent was equalised in 2001, or before the decriminalisation of homosexuality in Scotland in 1980. So these corporations' commitment to LGBT rights apparently only manifests itself when it's likely to make them a profit. And then there's the second hijacking. See, whereas the original Pride was about agitating for equal rights for gay people, it's now been taken over by activists who are obsessed with group identity and who believe that gender is more important than sex. That's why the British Library, to celebrate the advent of Pride Month this week, posted a thread on Twitter about the sex life of fish and how some species have been known to change from male to female. I mean, what's that got to do with Pride? Why have librarians seemingly forgotten that human beings aren't the same as fish? Now, they've since deleted those tweets because, well, you know, they're bonkers. And although we might laugh at that kind of nonsense, the ideology it promotes is actually rather sinister, particularly for gay people. See, in her book Time to Think by Hannah Barnes, she found that between 80 and 90% of adolescents referred to the Tavistock Paediatric Gender Clinic were same-sex attracted. Studies have long confirmed a correlation between gender nonconformity in youth and homosexuality in later life. At the Tavistock, staff used to joke that soon there would be no gay people left. Somehow, the medicalisation and sterilisation of gay people has been reframed as progressive. Even Stonewall, the UK's foremost LGBT charity, has redefined the word homosexual on its website and promotional materials to mean same-gender attracted. Its CEO, Nancy Kelly, has claimed that women who exclude trans people from their dating pool are akin to sexual racists. There's been an intense resurgence of old homophobic tropes online from gender ideologues that believe that genital preferences are transphobic and that lesbians who don't include men in their dating pool must be suffering from trauma. Gay rights were secured by recognising that a minority of people are instinctively attracted to members of their own sex. And the new ideology of gender identity rejects this notion entirely and actively shames gay people for their orientation. So when you see this flag, try to understand that many gay people consider it to be a symbol of opposition to gay rights. Women who are concerned about their rights consider it a symbol of misogyny because it promotes an ideology that denies the reality of sex-based oppression. And yet most people, gay people included, haven't even noticed this transition from the pro-gay rainbow flag to this anti-gay imposter. And that's because it's all happened so quickly. And activists are playing on good intentions of a public who don't want to be seen to be on the wrong side of history. Well, I would suggest that upholding the rights of women and gay people and protecting gender non-conforming children and opposing the hypocrisy of corporations is the truly progressive approach. Anyone who spends any time on social media will have seen that homophobia is clearly on the rise. It's coming from the reactionary elements of the right, who are now holding gay people responsible for sexualized drag shows for children and the proliferation of sexually explicit books in school libraries. But of course, they've fallen for the trick. This isn't gay people, that's gender ideologues who've convinced everyone that the LGBTQIA+ movement is one big happy family, when it isn't. And we know this because homophobia is also on the rise among gender ideologues themselves, who frequently go online to tell gay people to kill themselves. Some of them have said that they celebrate AIDS as a good thing. And this isn't just a few mad activists. There are thousands of examples of this if you've got the stomach to look them up. So whether it's coming from those who consider themselves right-wing or left-wing, anti-gay sentiments are back in fashion. And the best way to combat this is to remind everyone that that progress pride flag and the corporate orgy that accompanies it is not in the interests of gay people. And if it's too late to reclaim the original pride flag, we can at least ditch the new one. Okay, let's see what my panel make of all of this. Cressida, did you have any thoughts about pride as it exists now compared to what it used to be?
It's sad, isn't it? When it I mean, I know it sounds nice that it's a family day out. When you see Sainsbury's, for example, other companies are available with pride flags, you think, what are you saying? Did you think that gay people couldn't buy tea bags before you put the flag up? I mean,
yeah, it's like those zebra crossings that they've repainted in the rainbow. I could cross roads before that, you know.
Right.
I was able to do it.
It really makes me feel sad, because I would like to think we live in a society where lots of this has been achieved. It's kind of not my place to say, right? But
well, why not?
Because if there were homophobia swirling around me, I might not know about it.
But there isn't. I don't think there is. There is, apart from Lewis, maybe. You know, but do you think there's homophobia swirling around? Yeah, just you. Yeah, exactly. But Lewis, is there not a point to be made that, you know, these things spiral out of control? You start off with a legitimate movement that has legitimate aims. It reaches those aims, and then all of a sudden it goes a bit mad, it goes a bit bonkers. Maybe because it's got nothing left to do.
Right, and then it gets discarded when people just see the ridiculousness of the entire thing and they throw the whole thing out. The problem, what you're saying is that this whole business is, I'm a bit saddened because I think you'd make a great dad.
For goodness sake. I don't want children, Lewis.
Well, I don't care whether you want them or not. I think this world needs more people like you, and this is what
I'm sorry, Lewis. I can't see where this is going.
I'm trying not to go in the direction that I'm taking it in.
Okay.
But
it's almost quite homoerotic what you're doing right now.
No. Are you enjoying it? Is that I think the homosexual movement is, I think people need to be treated with respect and love, but I don't think it's good for the planet.
Okay. On that note,
wait. Can we have? Let me just.
No, look. No, you've made your bed. I'm going to let you lie in it.
No, because what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying.
I know, and let me know. What I'm saying is that they don't want us to have children.
Who doesn't?
The elites of this world. They want to, as I've said before on this program, they want a free ride from their big house to the airport to get on one of their
Lewis,
jets.
Can I suggest that you're going off topic ever so slightly here?
Yeah.
But look, don't worry. No, listen, Lewis, we will talk about those conspiracy theories of Satanists running the world. But maybe not now, because it's not what we're here to talk about. Anyway, look, we've got to go to a break anyway, but still to come on Free Speech Nation. Journalist Nick Wallace has done much to expose the ongoing post office IT scandal. He's going to be joining me in the studio to discuss that and some more interesting revelations. See you in a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in my big opinion, things are bad now, but would be worse under Keir Starmer. Britain can't afford a Labour government. In my take at 10, why bonkers green taxes are going to cost you more at the supermarket. And as Holly Willoughby returns to television, ITV continued to move deck chairs around the Titanic. My Mark Meets guest is Boris supporting MP David Morris, class politics legend Anne Widdecombe, my top pundits and tomorrow's papers. We're live from 9 till 11 on GB News.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Once a respected British institution, the Post Office continues to lurch from scandal to scandal. It remains enmeshed in the Horizon scandal, in which hundreds of sub-postmasters were wrongly prosecuted and had their lives destroyed because of information provided by a faulty IT system. It's been described as one of the biggest miscarriages in justice in British history. And it's now been revealed that between 2008 and 2001, some of the so-called suspects were placed in various groupings which were defined by racist terms. Journalist Nick Wallace wrote The Great Post Office Scandal, which is the definitive account of this story, and he joins me now. Nick, thanks very much for joining me. Nick, could you tell me, before we begin, about this latest revelation, could you tell us about The Great Post Office Scandal? What exactly happened there?
Well, at the turn of the century, the Post Office rolled out a massive IT system called Horizon, which was described at the time as the largest non-military IT system in Europe. Unfortunately, it didn't work. But what it did do was take responsibility for branch accounting, that is, what happens in each individual post office branch, out of the hands of the sub-postmasters who ran that branch and took it into the control of the post office. Unfortunately, due to the terms of their contract, the postmasters were legally responsible for the figures that this IT system threw up. And when they were faulty, then the Post Office unfortunately decided it was going to prosecute these people, and many hundreds of people got given criminal convictions for fraud-related offences to do with the misappropriation of public money, when in fact it was the computer system that was throwing up dodgy figures.
And why did this take so long to resolve itself?
Because the Post Office covered it up. In 2013, there was unequivocal evidence that there were problems with the Horizon IT system. Independent investigators had gone into it. But the Post Office refused to acknowledge this or admit it for another 6 years, and it had to have the truth dragged out of it, kicking and screaming, in a massive epic litigation at the High Court, which was won by the 555 sub-postmasters who took part in it. And since then, we've had the process of convictions being quashed and the compensation schemes being set up to try and help the poor people who've been left destitute by having criminal records for sometimes more than a decade. And yet that has found itself bogged down in the weeds as well.
Now, this kind of action is usually the kind of thing that people with money, with resources, can handle relatively well. But we're talking about workers at the Post Office who wouldn't have those kind of resources. I mean, can you give us any sense of the kind of impact that this had on these people?
Well, we know that there have been 4 suicides amongst the hundreds of people who were sacked and prosecuted. But this goes even wider than this. There were many people who found themselves out of a job. They'd been publicly shamed by having their post office taken away from them. And of course, sub-postmasters are very visible within their communities. They're not rich by any stretch of the imagination. Their earnings have historically been quite poor, but they were so visible. They were well known within their community. And so when they were suddenly sacked in mysterious circumstances, or were then charged with theft or false accounting, then of course a community could turn on them. We've heard stories of people's daughters being spat at. We've had people who were beaten up as a result of the shame that they brought on their community. And it was particularly keenly felt in the South Asian community, where it would break families apart, because if a sub-postmaster was sacked or prosecuted, it would bring such a degree of shame on their family and their community that they would often be ostracized, causing all sorts of incredible mental health problems for everyone who suffered like this.
And let's just bring us forward to what's happened now. There's been this scandal exposed at the Post Office of guidance which classified people according to race and used some language which I'm not going to use at this time on this channel, but very offensive, outdated, racist language. How is it the case that they had these documents? How did it happen?
Well, the historical version is that in the late 1970s, racial identification codes were introduced by the police in order to use them over radio. So you would have someone who was white European described as an IC1, and then they would go through the various racial descriptors of people. Now, some of those terms that were used in the late 1970s, now we would say, were wholly offensive. But they were essentially grandfathered in, I think, to the Post Office investigation teams, the people who made the prosecution decisions at the Post Office, because one of the signal things about this scandal, and one of the reasons it remained undetected for so long, was because the Post Office had its own investigation team and its own prosecutors. So they effectively bypassed the police and the CPS. But obviously some of these IC codes found their way into the Post Office investigation unit. And in their compliance documents, they were required to racially categorize their suspects. Now, you said this went on till 2008. We don't know when it finished, because the Post Office is currently investigating to find out when this compliance document actually was discontinued. So it may have been a good 2 or 3 years after that as well. And there's no doubt about it that these terms are, in the words of Nish Kumar, Victorian-era steam-powered racism. And when I've studied the Post Office for as long as I have, it's not surprising to me that they would use terms like this, because if your department is responsible for erroneously prosecuting hundreds of people on false evidence, it's hardly any surprise that your compliance systems are going to be in a complete outdated mess. And so but obviously the language itself, if you do read about it, and it's only a short Google away, is very, very offensive to lots of racial groups.
I mean, that's the point. I wouldn't even just say this is outdated language. It's positively 19th century. It's so far outdated that I find it baffling. I can't understand how it could be, how these compliance documents, that no one saw them at any point and thought, oh, well, they're due a bit of revision. How did that not happen?
Well, I guess if you're going back to an organisation, particularly a department within the organisation, which was almost exclusively white, was largely made up of burly ex-coppers who'd made their way over from the Met and didn't think that closely about what they were doing. And that is why so many people were falsely prosecuted on dodgy evidence, because they didn't understand what they were doing. They were not a competent organisation. So it's unsurprising that incompetent people who don't know how to navigate the modern world very well still have the mindset of a 19th century prosecutor and still are using language which wouldn't be out of place in the 19th century.
And just very quickly, before we finish, Nick, now that, you've written your book, this has been covered, the scandal is out there in the open, does the Post Office look like it's going to try and rehabilitate its image anytime soon?
Well, the racial language document is just one of 3 scandals which have broken in the last month. We've had the tax lawyer, Dan Needle, the man who brought down Nadeem Zahawi over his tax affairs, look into this scandal and actually submit a formal complaint to the Solicitors Regulation Authority about the way that one element of the Post Office compensation scheme is being run for victims, because he says it's misleading and the Post Office is either deliberately or misleading its victims or it's incompetent. And on top of that, we found out that Post Office executives had awarded themselves bonuses just for cooperating with the public inquiry into this scandal, which is their statutory duty. Now, this has happened in the space of 4 weeks. You wonder how the Post Office continues to go about shooting itself in the foot the entire time and whether it will ever recover. There are people starting to ask serious questions about whether the organisation is fit for purpose at all, because it doesn't have any value to the country anymore.
Nick, I'm sorry, we are out of time, but thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Really appreciate it. And still to come on Free Speech Nation, the Bible gets banned and BBC show Casualty goes woke. It's almost time for social sensations. See you in a minute.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Okay, so this it's part of the show where we look at the social sensations of the week. And first up, we've got this news report from Utah. It's a school district clamped down on that well-known purveyor of pornographic and indecent materials, the Bible. Now, this was an interesting story that went viral, and of course it went viral because, Cressida, it's an odd one, isn't it? What happened here?
Well, it sounds odd on the surface, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it sounds like probably a very progressive parent has complained to the school and said, you've been banning some books, now we're going to ban yours, because there's already been some books banned for being too sexual for children.
Yes.
So this is a bit of tit for tat, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what it is, isn't it, Lewis? It's sort of, because there are some sexually explicit elements to the Bible, and so if the Florida state or whatever is going to ban books with pornographic elements, you could make a case that the Bible would have to go as well.
Well, it's interesting that they chose Utah to do it in, which is a very kind of weirdy religious state. It's in the West, and it's got all those Mormons living there. But it's eventually it's going to lead to the dissolution of the American system of the states, because some are going to be...
OK, well, apparently we've got a package on this one. Let's have a look.
The Davis County School District is removing the King James Version of the Bible from elementary and junior high schools here. The school district says around 7 to 8 schools around the district had the Bible in their libraries. They are being removed following a Utah law that prohibits schools from having pornographic or indecent material.
I mean, it is a travesty, actually, because the King James Bible as well is a really beautiful document, and it's been really formative in terms of the way that we speak.
Well, I don't know, but I think kids all up and down the country are going to be going to seek it out now, aren't they? Maybe it's just a marketing...
No, look, if they're looking for the rude bits, they're difficult to find. You have to be a bit of a theologian or a scholar to know where to look.
Right.
But good luck, kids. Anyway, now it's part of the show where we talk through your unfiltered dilemmas. The first dilemma came in from David. David says, yesterday I joined a queue at the supermarket and saw a very elderly gentleman take an age over his transaction before wandering off in a confused state, wearing a vacant stare. When I left, he was getting behind the wheel of a car. Report my concerns or none of my business. Sounds like fraudulence. What do you think, Lewis?
What, an age over? What is that?
It's a phrase. He means it takes a long time over.
Oh, took an age over.
It's not grammatically accurate.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they said, well, he probably thought, well, he's the president of the United States, he'll be all right.
Possibly. Cressida, do you have any thoughts on that
Is
one?
Joe Biden allowed to drive? I don't know. So what he's saying, he saw somebody navigating a self-checkout and thought, I don't like the way he's done that.
And then he saw him drive a car
and thought he should report this to who?
To who? I think just mind your own business, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that's one of the more baffling dilemmas we've had, but keep them coming in anyway. I'm afraid that is all we've got time for, but thank you very much for joining us for Free Speech Nation. I'd like to thank my panel, Cressida Wetton and Lewis Schaefer, and to all of the guests that you've seen tonight. And by the way, if you want to join us live in the studio and be part of our wonderful audience, you can do that. All you have to go to www.sroaudiences.com. You can see the web address on the screen right now. And do come along, because we've got wine, we've got snacks. It's a lot of fun, isn't it, Cressida? It's a lot of fun. So do come along and join us. You said that in a kind of sceptical way. And don't worry, Lewis isn't here every week, but he's actually... Lewis, I'm sorry about that one. That was too far, wasn't it? But then you did call me half a journalist.
Well, no, you are a journalist sometimes. You have your journalist hat on, and sometimes you have too much of an agenda to be called a journalist.
You are always Lewis.
But you know what? Your agenda is generally right, so I support it. But it's like when you...
No, on that positive note, I'll just cut you off there when he says something nice about me for a change. But look, stay tuned for the brilliant Mark Dolan tonight. That is next. And please don't forget that Headliners is on every night at 11 p.m. Lewis is on tonight. And that is the late night paper preview show where comedians talk you through the next day's top news stories. That's every night at 11 o'clock. Don't miss it. And thank you all for watching Free Speech Nation. I'll see you next week.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Greg Dewhurst, and looking at the next few days, it stays fine and settled, but there are signs of something a little hotter and more humid on the way to end the week. But at the moment, high pressure is in charge of our weather, keeping it settled. This low pressure moves towards us, allowing a southerly airstream to develop towards next weekend, increasing risk of some heavy showers. A fine end to Sunday. We are seeing some low cloud across eastern areas push its way inland as we move overnight tonight. Thick enough for the odd spot of drizzle. Clearest skies holding on across western parts of the UK, and under those clear skies, temperatures could dip to mid to low single figures, holding up in the east where it is a grey start to Monday morning. Low cloud also affecting Midlands, perhaps even eastern parts of Wales. But through the morning and into the afternoon, we should see that low cloud lift and break back towards the eastern coast, where it will stay quite grey for much of the day. Whilst much of the country will have a fine day, plenty of sunny spells and temperatures lifting into the low 20s. Still chilly along eastern coast with that northeasterly breeze here. On Monday evening, we've got plenty of sunshine before dusk, and then as we head towards midnight and overnight, we see the low cloud pushing back in once again. A bit of deja vu here, thick enough for a little bit of light rain and drizzle in places, but perhaps pushing a little further westwards than previous nights. Under any clear spells, particularly across western Scotland, Northern Ireland, temperatures here on the chilly side, and so quite a grey start to Tuesday morning. Best of the sunshine, western fringes of the UK, much of Northern Ireland, and then just like the last few days, we'll see that low cloud slowly push back. It may take longer, so some central and eastern parts of England staying on the cloudy side. Best of the sunshine in the west. Further sunshine Wednesday and Thursday, temperatures in the low 20s. See you again later.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's